1 year of Russian invasion in Ukraine. Why Putin will not back down. Revisiting the end goal and his ideological justification. Again, this episode of the Neoliberal Round podcast is entitled 1 Year of Russian Invasion in Ukraine. Why Putin will not back down. Revisiting the end goal and his ideological justification. Today is the 1 year anniversary of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And today, Vladimir Putin gave a speech at a pro-Russian rally that was organized by the Kremlin, which saw over about 200,000 Russians were gathered. And in the speech that he gave today, he reiterated his intention for the war. Putin in a speech, and by the way, if you were to listen to, if you haven't heard the speech that he gave today resembled the speech that he gave on March 16th.
Да, безусловно. Они будут пытаться делать ставку на так называемую пятую колонну, на национал-предателей, на тех, кто зарабатывает деньги здесь, у нас, а живет там. И живет даже не в географическом смысле этого слова, а по своим мыслям, по своему рабскому сознанию. Я совсем не осуждаю тех, у кого вилла в Майами или на французской ривьере, кто не может обойтись без фуагра, устриц или так называемых гендерных свобод. Но проблема абсолютно не в этом, а, повторю, в том, что многие из таких людей по своей сути ментально находятся именно так, а не здесь, не с нашим народом, не с Россией. Это и есть, по их мнению, признак принадлежности к высшей касте, к высшей расе. Подобные люди готовы и мать родную продать, только бы им разрешили сидеть в прихожей у этой самой высшей касты. И они хотят быть похожими на нее, всячески подражая ей. Но они забывают или не понимают вообще, что этой так называемой высшей касте они, если и нужны, то как расходный материал, чтобы использовать их для нанесения максимального ущерба нашему народу. Коллективный Запад пытается расколоть наше общество, спекулируя на боевых потерях, на социально-экономических последствиях санкций, спровоцировать гражданское противостояние в России и, используя свою пятую колонну, стремиться к достижению своей цели. А цель одна, я уже говорил об этом – разрушение России. Но любой народ, а тем более российский народ, всегда сможет отличить истинных патриотов от подонков и предателей и просто выплюнет их, как случайно залетевшую в рот мушку, выплюнет на панель. Убежден, такое естественное и необходимое самоочищение общества только укрепит нашу страну, нашу солидарность, сплоченность и готовность ответить на любые вызовы.
Good morning. That was a speech that we just played from an episode we did last year, March 17th, 2022, It was an episode entitled Putin's Latest Speech, March 16th, 2022. He reveals his mindset. I delve into it here and the red flags. That was the title of the episode we did some time ago in March 16th, 2020. March 17th, 2022, where we delve and analyzed Putin's latest speech. It was a speech that laid the foundation, that provided the justification and the rationale for the invasion. It was just 2 months or 2 months or a month after the invasion, and he provided this speech, which was an academic speech. It was a lecture. And in that lecture, in that speech, in that address to the nation and to the world, he laid the foundations. He provided his intentions for this war. And today, Putin had a rally, a pro-war rally that had about over 200,000 Russian people, where he again reiterated the message that he had provided us on the March 16, 2022 speech. It was the same speech. A speech which reiterated and repeated the basis for the war. And so today, which marks the 1 year anniversary, we will go back, and we have done several episodes covering Putin and covering this war. We took a break a bit, but this year is the 1 year anniversary, and now we're hearing the world is some people are still getting the message. Some people are still catching on to the news about what's going on in Ukraine, and the world has been slow to act. But what we had warned is coming. It's coming to roost, because his intentions seems to go further than Ukraine. But this episode promises to be quite powerful, and it's a repeat of some episodes that we had done that you had missed. We have done over 150 episodes, so it might get lost in the episodes, in all of the episodes that we've carried. But today is the 1 year anniversary, and we will lift up two very important episodes. We will revisit two very important episodes. This one on March 16th, the one on March 16th, 2022, Putin's latest speech, his speech which laid the very foundation, which was the hypothesis, the opening argument, which justified the war. And then later, there was a report, a breaking news, where Russia called for the denazification of Ukraine, which expanded this. So this particular speech which we're about to play, it's the initial assessment. It's a 42 minutes, and it was an his opening argument, so to speak. And then later on, there was another episode we carried where we reported on this news that we had obtained on the grounds from news agency, where Russia and the Kremlin, Putin, called for the denazification of Russia, of Ukraine. So we will lift up those two today. So let's begin. Let's continue with where we left off. Let me ask you a question. Do you think a World War III is imminent? Do you think we're heading into a World War III? Based on the Russian war, what do you think?
No, I don't.
Why not?
I don't.
Have you been following the news?
I have.
Okay, why? Why do you think? why do you not? Why do you disagree with me?
I just think it just hit to hit. You know?
Just what?
Hit to hit.
Head to head.
And they're like in both countries are trying to keep their respect, and it's just I don't really know.
Russia is invading a whole country. Okay?
I
and they are destroying the country, killing millions. The vice president just accused them of crimes against humanity, which that should have been done. Should have been done since the very day it started last year. They waited all this time. They've been killing people, uprooted lives. Can I tell you, absolutely ridiculous. There's no respect here. Russia is trying to justify that. They're trying to there's no justification. I don't know there's no justification.
It is.
I mean, he tries to judge, and
innocent people are dying.
Of course, innocent people are dying because of his ideologies of this mother Russia. No, let me tell you, it's the same thing that's happening in the Caribbean.
That's what kills me, but that's what scares me. There's someone that tells themselves and believes that they can do whatever they want without no repercussions.
Let me tell you,
what level will
let me tell you, they do things differently.
Will they stop? Like when would they stop?
They were the former masters.
What would they do next?
It's all about, listen to what I'm saying, it's all about privilege and position. The same thing that they give you independence, but you're supposed to stay down. But the fact that Ukraine was rising, that was a problem. It threatened Russia's dominance in the region. Okay, so what are they going to do? Is they going to issue an embargo? They can't issue an embargo because Ukraine does not depend on Russia. They can go around Russia and trade with the West. West wants to trade with Ukraine. So of course, the only option Russia now have is war then, because they can't levy an embargo. That's not going to help them. It's just like the US can put an embargo on Cuba. Okay, and nobody trade with Cuba, and it affects Cuba's economy. All right, and they can have their CIA penetrate. Russia can't do that. So the only thing they can do then to reassert their dominance and so on is to go to war, to invade a smaller country. Because to reassert their dominance, it's all about reasserting their dominance in the world, and they're willing to go to war because on this ideology. Other countries use stealth, like America. They don't use war to dominate another country. They use embargoes and structural adjustment and debt. But of course, Russia, they're using force and war. That's because all of these post-industrial countries, the problem is they want to keep the other countries down. They got their independence and everything, but they're supposed to stay down. That's the problem here. And so they're going to war with these people. I was saying that I'd asked you the question actually, and I went off on a tangent. I asked the question with all the dynamics surrounding the Russian invasion, and by dynamic I mean China's support, because China announced that it will support Russia, and this is not new. I believe that Russia had always benefited secretly from China's support, but now they are publicly doing so. And you ask the question, why? Why the change of strategy? Why is it that they're making it a public thing? And of course, recently there was this spy balloon, and the US just shot down a spy balloon. So now it provided. Well, no, it provided a justification.
When they made an announcement about it, and China responded and said that a few years ago.
Oh, the US had a spy balloon? Had a spy device?
No, had sent,
had a spy
device.
But we know that US had always had their agents. Yeah, all these powerful countries they all have their agents. Okay, but this provided a great justification. I don't know. Maybe it provided the justification for China to make a public announcement that they're going to side with Russia. Probably it's something they needed, an opportunity. They needed some crisis. They needed something. I don't know, and of course we know that the U.S. President Biden is visited the Ukraine and is currently in the region for a meeting with the U.S. allies, and they are now providing they're now providing more support in terms of sophisticated weapons. So I'm telling you that the podcast that we're gonna share 2 episodes, and the 2 episodes that we're gonna share on this podcast today are 2 powerful episodes because they provide the ideological basis for his um, war and for our conclusion. Because the conclusion I'm making that he's not going to back down. We're gonna share 2 powerful episodes where Putin laid the ideological foundations and his end goal of his invasion. And when you listen to these episodes, Dante, they suggest that he does not intend to back down or to leave Ukraine. He does not. This was, and of course, so therefore, this will set up an outright brawl as Ukraine becomes more equipped with better weapons. And with all the dynamics surrounding this invasion, are we leading into or heading into World War III? And the people and you can answer yes or no. And you can participate on Spotify or Twitter, LinkedIn or Reddit. Ronaldo McKenzie is the handle. Of course, later this week we will have John Anthony Castro providing an update on his suit, which has been expedited to the U.S. court, and also he will talk with us about. I thought that ABC News was snubbing him because he's a Republican running for president, and when they report on Nikki Haley is seen as the first person to challenge him. So he actually sent me a tweet explaining, responding to what's happening here, and he's going to talk about this on the show on Friday. And then we're going to have Tia Jackson. Her new book, Purpose Through the Pain, is out, and she has a book signing coming up in March. We will have her on the show. And of course, I will have several other podcasts with some excerpts about my book. And then there's this powerful podcast that I will share called Looking at Weed and Dispensaries. The podcast is going to entitle Black People Shouldn't Be Rich, the Other People Should Be. It's already published and ready. But today, I realized today was the anniversary of Ukraine, and I had to do something marking the 1-year anniversary. And we have done a lot of podcasts. Powerful, groundbreaking that you would not have heard. So sit back, relax, enjoy. It's powerful, erudite, and deep. Trust me, it is. I listened to them and they were moving. We'll be right back after this. It was again the hypothesis, the justification, the rationale, the basis. He laid out the foundation for war. And of course, he will never give up, and he will, because he has to save face. But here is the podcast that we did on March, which day was it? Some time ago. Here it is. Welcome to the Neoliberal Realm podcast. I'm Ronaldo McKenzie. That was the voice of President Vladimir Putin of Russia on March 16, 2022, his latest message. He reveals his mind, and just at the end of his speech, he says, "Spit them out, the traitors." I am convinced that such a natural and necessary self-purification of society will only strengthen our country, our solidarity, cohesion, and readiness to respond to any challenges. Again, just towards the end of his message just now, and we will play again the entire message for you and translate it for you as well. But towards the end, he says, "Spit them out, the traitors." I am convinced that such a natural and necessary self-purification of society will only strengthen our country, our solidarity, cohesion, and readiness to respond to any challenges. What is the challenge is he here talking about? Is Ukraine in the way of what he wants to achieve. And so he has to get Ukraine out of the way in order to realize any goals. We will have this and much more for you today. Welcome to the Neoliberal Round Podcast. Putin delivered his latest speech in a national broadcast to the Russian people recently, and we have that for you today. Putin revealed his mind. I delve into it here, lifting up some very important points and highlight red flags and signal a warning for us and the world. You can watch Putin's esoteric speech via my YouTube channel, Ronaldo Mackenzie, and it is translated for you. And I unearth for you what he's really saying and send a warning. Now, this presentation is also the article, this presentation and this particular podcast will also speak to the issue of what I've been talking about, which is Orientalism and Occidentalism. And I will not delve into what Orientalism is and Occidentalism. But when you begin to study this speech and dissect this speech and look into it very closely, you have several takeaways that one must consider very closely, because in it there are several red flags. So, as I talk about Orientalism and Occidentalism as part of a wider discussion, I will have later on the development and dynamics of power, privilege, position, and status within the foundations of society, and divine intervention. This particular speech by Putin must be placed into perspective. And so I will play the speech from the beginning for you, and then later I want to delve into it. So here we go. Putin's latest speech, which is available if you go on ronaldocmckenzie.blogspot.com, and you can click on the article. It's entitled Putin's latest speech, March 16. He reveals his mind. And it is quite esoteric. It is quite deep. And when you are able to dissect it and to analyze it critically, based on one's understanding of all things, based on one's understanding of the history of the Soviet Union, based on one's understanding of Putin's, if you study Putin's ideologies, and based on his writings and articles and speeches, and the message to his people. And when you listen to a previous episode that I carried about what the Russians are saying, and many of the Russians are saying what the experts are saying, that he is on a world-saving mission. And there is also his world-saving mission to save Europe, or to save Russia, all of Russia, and the former the USSR countries from Western propaganda. And when we talk about propaganda, we're talking about ideology. We're talking about Western strategy to penetrate their country with their values, as if they are the higher caste system or have a better way of life. But we want to delve into it. It is quite interesting once you begin to study what he's saying, or to examine and to explore it. Here is President Putin, not Zelensky. If I had said that, that's a Freudian slip. And so here is President Putin on March 16.
А повторю в том, что многие из таких людей. Да, безусловно.
He said, yes, of course, they, the West, will bet on the so-called fifth column, on national traitors.
И будут пытаться делать ставку на так называемую пятую колонну, на национал-предателей, на тех, кто...
on those who earn money here with us but live there.
Зарабатывает деньги здесь, у нас, а живет там.
And they live not even in the geographical sense of the world or of the word, but according to their thoughts, according to their slavish consciousness.
И живет даже не в географическом смысле этого слова, а по своим мыслям, по своему рабскому сознанию. Я совсем не...
I do not at all judge those who have a villa in Miami or on the French Riviera.
Осуждаю тех, у кого вилла в Майами или на французской ривьере. Кто?
Those who can't do without foie gras or foie gras, oysters, or the so-called gender freedoms. I do not despise them.
Не может обойтись без фуагра, устриц или так называемых гендерных свобод. Но проблема абсолютно не в...
But the issue here is not in that, but in the fact that many of these people,
а повторю в том, что многие из таких людей по своей...
many of these people, by their very nature, are mentally located exactly there and not here, not with our people, not with Russia.
В сути, ментально находятся именно там, а не здесь, не с нашим народом, не с Россией. Это и есть.
This is, in their opinion, a sign of belonging to a higher caste or to a higher race.
По их мнению, признак принадлежности к высшей касте, к высшей расе. Подобные люди...
Such people are ready to sell their own mother if only they were allowed to sit in the hallway of this very highest caste.
Готовы и мать родную продать, только бы им разрешили сидеть в прихожей у этой самой высшей касты. И они хотят...
They want to be like her, meaning the higher caste, this higher caste. They want to be like her, the West, imitating her in every possible way.
Быть похожими на нее, всячески подражая ей. Но они забывают...
Yet, they forget or do not understand at all that if they are needed by this so-called higher caste,
или не понимают вообще, что этой так называемой высшей касте...
Yet they forget or do not understand at all that if they are needed by this so-called higher caste,
Они, если и нужны,
then they are needed only as expendable material. Again, if these traitors are needed by the so-called higher caste, the West, then they're only needed as expendable material in order to use them to inflict maximum damage on our people. You hear the suspicions here. Let's continue.
то как расходный материал, чтобы использовать их для нанесения максимального ущерба нашему народу. Коллективный Запад пытается...
I'm going to repeat that again.
То как расходный материал.
Then they are only needed, and he used, notice he's saying they. Who is they? We will delve into that a little bit. They are only needed as expendable material in order to use them to inflict maximum damage on our
чтобы
people.
Использовать их для нанесения максимального ущерба нашему народу. Коллективный Запад пытается расколоть.
The collective West is trying to split our society, speculating on the combat losses, on the socio-economic consequences of sanctions.
Наше общество, спекулируя на боевых потерях, на социально-экономических последствиях санкций, спровоцировать
Provoking a civil confrontation in Russia and using its fifth column to achieve its goal.
гражданское противостояние в России и, используя свою пятую колонну, стремиться к достижению своей цели. А цель одна.
And there is only one goal. I have already spoken about it. The destruction of Russia. He believes that the West is out to destroy Russia.
Я уже говорил об этом. Разрушение России. Но
But, he says, any people, and even more so, the Russian people, will be able to distinguish true patriots from scum and traitors.
любой народ, а тем более российский народ, всегда сможет отличить истинных патриотов от подонков и предателей и просто выплюнуть.
And simply spit them out like a midget that accidentally flew into their mouths.
Как случайно залетевшую в рот мушку выплюнет на панель.
Spit out on the pavement.
Убежден.
I am convinced that such a natural and necessary self-purification of society
Естественное и необходимое самоочищение общества только
will only
укрепит
strengthen
нашу
our
страну.
country, our solidarity, cohesion, and readiness to respond
Солидарность,
to any
сплоченность и
challenge.
готовность ответить на любые вызовы.
That is President Putin. Again, President Putin on March 16 delivered this message.
Да,
Yes, of
безусловно,
course.
они будут пытаться
The West will bet on the so-called fifth column on the national traitors, on those who earn money here with us but live there. And they live not even in the geographical sense of the word, but according to their thoughts, according to their slavish consciousness. I do not at all judge those who have a villa in Miami or on the French Riviera, who can't do without foie gras, oysters, or the so-called gender freedoms. But the issue here is not in the fact, but not in that fact, but in the fact that many of these people, by their very nature, are mentally located exactly there, and not here, not with our people, not with Russia. This is in their opinion, a sign of belonging to a higher caste, to a higher race. Such people are ready to sell their own mother, if only they were allowed to sit in the hallway of this very higher caste. They want to be like her, meaning the higher caste, imitating her in every possible way. Yet they forget or do not understand that they are only needed as expendable material in order to use them to inflict maximum damage on our people. The collective West is trying to split our society, speculating on the combat losses, on the socio-economic consequences of actions, provoking a civil confrontation in Russia, and using its fifth column to achieve its goal. And there is only one goal. I have already spoken about it, the destruction of Russia. But any people, and even more so the Russian people, will be able to distinguish true patriots from scum and traitors. And simply spit them out like a midget that accidentally flew into a mouth. Spit them out. That is the Russian President Vladimir Putin's speech that was delivered on March 16, 2022. So, Putin believes, and we are going to delve into this today. This is very important. Putin believes the West thinks it's of a higher caste and is not to be trusted, for they only use peoples and treat them as expendables. He justifies genocide or murder or killing, or the killing of Ukrainians, and those who side with the West as a purification mechanism to strengthen Russia, all of Russia, including the former USSR countries. In this speech, he reveals his true intentions to unite all of Russia by cutting down and cutting off those who side with the West and believe that Western values about, example, gender equality are better than Russians' position on gender equality. You can be for gender equality, but don't force it on us. Don't believe that it's better than our position that puts men and women in their proper place. That's what he's saying here. For Putin, he believes that the West assumes that it's progressive or democratic or Slavish ways of life is better. Saying here. For Putin, he believes that the West assumes that it's progressive or democratic or Slavish ways of life is better, and that this makes their society better than Russia. Again, for Putin believes that the West assumes that it's progressive or democratic or Slavish ways of life is better, and that this makes their society better than Russia. He believes that the former USSR countries have lost their way and are adopting Western ways at the expense of Russia. And in order to save and preserve Mother Russia and its children, and we're not just talking about Russia in a geographic sense, as he said. I'm not talking about in a geographic sense. When we talk about Russia, we're talking about Russia and the former Soviet countries, which made Russia Russia, an ideology, a principle, a way of life, a people. He believes the former USSR countries have lost their way and are adopting Western ways at the expense of Russia. And in order to save and preserve Mother Russia and its children from departing from that which is truly Russian, we must spew them out, those who are traitors. That's what he says, those who are traitors, even if it means going to war. He doesn't say that in so many ways, but that's what he's saying. Spit them out on the pavement like who they are. Destroy them, bomb them, massacre them. This is extremism. The kind of extremism that seems to be growing everywhere. It was just recently where it happened, here in the US, when white extremists marched to the US Capitol, who many believe were under the influence and motivation of some political leaders to stop the vice president from certifying the US presidential elections, a democratic process here in the US. Further, Putin is being duplicitous and hypocritical when he says others believe their way is better, when he is forcing his way as the way for all Russians, or all Russia to follow, including Lithuania, Poland, Kazakhstan, and all the other former Soviet countries. Prejudicing a way of life and expecting all to subscribe to that or be killed. Further, once it was the way of life, but when a way of life or a taboo is no longer a taboo, I'm making a point here. Once it was a way of life, maybe once that maybe these countries accepted these Russian values. And I must make a point. There is probably a particular idea or behavior was a way of life. But when a way of life or a taboo is no longer a taboo, and now accepted as part of the way of life, then there is a backlash from the status quo. Again, let me say this. Once it was the way of life, a particular behavior or idea or practice. But when a way of life or a taboo is no longer a taboo and now accepted as part of the new way of life, then there is a backlash from the status quo. And this is the backlash. You know, I'm going to stop here by saying in 2010 or 2009 or 2010, some time ago, I did some work with SRBI, which is a research company, Schulman, Ronkus, and Bucolvalus Inc., a research company. And and this was, I am so happy that I got an opportunity to work with this company as a research interviewer, interviewing hundreds of people all over the world and in the US about various marketing trends and current issues and concerns. I remember one of the interview questions, or one of the interviews that we were doing in 2009 and 2010 was one of the questions I asked this question. What are your concerns about are you concerned that by 2020, or between 2020 up to 2020 or 2025, the minority will form the majority in this country, and the majority will become part of the minority. But when we talk about the minority and the majority, we're talking about racially here, okay? Racially. But that is if a particular society is based on race, and not just race, but racial values. Because, and you hear Putin is talking about not just geographically, but in terms of values that a society have, or societies have, or a particular society has. So when I did this research in 2000, about how long ago was that? 12 years ago, 11 years ago, I was doing as a research interviewer, asking questions of Americans about their feelings and attitudes towards a particular prediction that by 2020, and this is, we're in 2022 now, but in 2009 up to 2010, there were concerns that by 2020 to 2025, the majority will form the minority, and the minority will form the majority. And we're talking about in terms of race, the demographics of the US. And of course, you can go online and check recent studies, but what were people saying then? What were their fears? But they are afraid, for some people, they are afraid that what will America look like? And so if you see in January, after the election, when they stormed the Capitol, people had fears and they were willing to storm the Capitol and they were willing to kill our elected politicians, and they were willing to commit heinous crimes and extremism and justify that because they were trying to preserve a value, or they were trying to save the society. So there are people who are justified, and so you see, we are not far removed as a country from what Putin and Russia is doing. You know, we are not, because it was just recently where we were faced with extremism, where a group of persons in society feel as though their particular society is getting away from them, and they were willing to go to the Capitol and even to commit a crime and to break laws. This is the issue. This is the issue of this is what we're talking about here. About certain values and about lifting up. And today I just actually responded to an email that was sent to me by I just lost the email. I really need to send you. Someone asked me a question about diversity, I believe it was Caroline Fairchild, who is an editor at LinkedIn News, and she sent me an email saying we often reach out to LinkedIn members who we think can add informed perspective on the day's news and trends. She said, a recent report shows that gender and race are on the top of the mind for most leaders working in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But when you look at other facets of diversity, such as sexual orientation, disability, and age, to name a few, that attention to progress drops significantly. She said, I want to hear from you. What aspect of identity do you feel is most often ignored in the current approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I responded to her. And that response will actually be a part of a podcast presentation that I will be doing. But you guys all know my position because I have submitted several articles about the issue of differentiating and categorizing and putting people in categories. I am against putting people in race. I am against putting people in categories because that is a recipe for disaster. And I am going to actually talk about that later on. And I'm actually here trying to find a I said, because I said, what is the ultimate of all things? The ultimate. I will stop here, and that was, you can listen to the rest of that episode of the podcast. Now we are going to play the other podcast where they talk about the denazification of Russia. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. Actually, it's not Russia calls for the denazification of Russia, but on April 8th, 2022, that we carried an episode. It was entitled "Breaking News." Russia News called for the denazification of Ukraine, and we are going to play that for you. And of course, it's available on the podcast. We play excerpts of that for you. Here it is. Here is the episode. Good afternoon. I am Ronaldo Mackenzie, and welcome to another episode of the Neoliberal Round podcast. Today we have breaking news, and we have an update as to what's going on in the war with Ukraine and Russia. We obtained a published piece calling for full-blown genocide and destruction of Ukraine as a state. Again, Russian state news agency published a piece calling for full-blown genocide and destruction of Ukraine as a state. And we obtained this from a news source and from Ukrainia, the Ukrainian news source. But again, today we will be sharing a published piece calling for full-blown genocide and destruction of Ukraine as a state. And just before I do so, you may recall that some time ago I published an article entitled Putin's Speech, March 16, 2022. He reveals his mind. Again, some time ago, via Ronaldo.Mackenzie Studios on YouTube, I shared a YouTube video where Putin gave a speech and he revealed his mind. And Putin's speech on March 16, 2022 is similar. This article resembles Putin's ideologies and is part of the Russian propaganda to justify a war that they are losing. I wrote Putin's latest speech, March 16, 2022. He reveals his mind. I delve into it here, lifting up some very important points and highlight red flags and signal a warning for us and the world. And I said, let us watch Putin's esoteric speech, and I'm going to play a bit of it for you. We've already listened to much of this. This is a repeat of the episode on April 8th, 2022. But in this episode, I replayed the episode that I just played, so we won't delve into that. So I'm going to fast forward it if I can. The article says Russia's recognition of the need for denazification of Ukraine means the recognition that the Crimean scenario is impossible for Ukraine as a whole. However, the scenario was also impossible in 2014 in the rebellious Donbass. Only 8 years of resistance to Nazi violence and terror led to internal cohesion and a consciously unequivocal mass refusal to preserve any unity and connection to Ukraine, which defined itself as a Nazi society. You see what's going on here? Russia. Yeah, I said to you, I'm writing a book on. I'm doing a book project, and it's entitled "Position, Power, Privilege, and Status." And here we are seeing an issue of power, because issues begin, and this is an issue of ethnocentrism, because it is as if the Ukrainians don't have a sense of the individual. And I said to you, what is the ultimate of all things? The ultimate of all things is that we live together as one, with reality, with all of our individualities. And I say, and I continue in that particular theme, in that particular, one of my first blog posts, I wrote that, and I continue by saying, a man said once you label me, you negate me. And that's what is happening here. Russia and Putin is negating the individual, negating the individuality, the sovereignty, the nation. And they are creating, so the first thing, and that is the issue of power, that is the strategy of power. They create an identity for the other. And that is why sometimes you ask me, how do you identify? I say, I am first Ronaldo. I do not identify as one thing or the other, because once I tell you how do you identify, then immediately these labels conjures up images in people's mind of who and what or who I am, and then more often than not, the approach and the engagement, how we engage the individual, is then colored by the images that you conjure up in your mind based on the labels of identity that these labels carry with it. So when you ask me who I am, I am Ronaldo. And then we can have a discussion about who I am and so on and so forth. That is important. But the issue of labor is important. If you look, and I say to you, the issue, race is a pseudoscience, race is a strategy. The categories in society is the downfall of society. It's a challenge for society and for humanity and for progress. Because it provides an opportunity. It facilitates it facilitates destruction. And I talk about Orientalism and Occidentalism. And I share a story from Edward Said's book when he talks about Orientalism. Talk about ideas that the East have about the West, and how the ideas of the East about the West is the East sees the West as irreligious. And so they carry out attacks like 9/11 and so on and so forth. It's justified based on values, because they believe that their values are better than the Western values, and everyone should religion, even in religion, you have those values. And I say to you, even when you study globalization and the global dynamics in the world, and I talk about in my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, when I talk about the bureaucratic phenomenon, how countries came together and create WTOs and international organizations that would help to facilitate trade and set rules. But at the end of the day, when the rules aren't applicable to everyone, because a few people who already have advantage set rules and they dilly-dally around these rules. They circumvent these rules. But the other countries, such as the global south countries, were forced to abide by certain rules, especially already they have limited resources, and so they have to go to the international, the big countries, the post-industrial countries to ask for money. And they are already part of a World Trade Organization with rules. And when you go to the IMDb or the Inter-American Bank or the International Monetary Fund, and when these countries went and asked for loans, where does the money come from? Where does the IMDb get the money? Where does the World Bank get the money? Where does the IMF get? They get the money from the post-industrial, the developed countries. Lend them this money, and that, of course, there are conditions, and then these bodies then lend these other countries money. But then the loan comes with certain conditions that hold them back, that prevent them from meaningfully competing in the global world, in a globalized world. And that's what has happened. And so conditions prevent them from competing. And then the rules don't favor, because I say to you, while some countries could not subsidize their local economy and the farmers and so on and so forth and their industry, the other countries were doing that and then penetrating and flooding these local markets. And that's what you see, the issue of power, the issue of privilege, the issue of status within society, and how society creates certain rules and organizations and then expect only certain people to abide by these rules. We call this Pharisaicalism. Do as I say, but not as I do. This is it, okay? And of course, we still continue to see, but of course, what we do, we create labels, meanings. That's what power does. It moves away. And I said to you some time ago, I had an interview with the owner of the Ubuntu Fine Arts Gallery, and if you listen to one of my podcasts, I interviewed this gentleman, Stephen C.W. Taylor, and I asked him about Ubuntu, and Ubuntu talks about the individual, respecting the individual, valuing the individual, and moving away from ethnocentrism. But even though we have an idea of this issue of, we understand ethnocentrism, and even though we understand human tendency to judge others based on their own value, and that creates conflict in society, people still cannot move away from that because of this greed, because of this drive for power. And he talks about this Ubuntu principle of the individual. We talked, earlier I shared an article about Orientalism and Occidentalism, and Edward Said talks about that. And actually, I was at Georgetown University, and we were looking at the foundation of knowledge. And one of the things that we talked about, and we look at Orientalism and Occidentalism, but more so Orientalism. But I did a paper, and because I wanted to compare Orientalism with Occidentalism, because Orientalism is looking at Western views about the East, and Occidentalism is looking at Western views about the East, because Eastern views about the West is that the West is irreligious, and that justifies wars. While in Occidentalism, the West is saying, well, the East, they have certain ideas about the East. They're fundamentalism, or they're not intelligent. They're lacking in intellect, and so on and so forth. And of course, you see that when Putin talks about this value, there's suspicions about the other, because
people want to penetrate the other, and so they try to define the other. That's exactly what is happening. Putin is here defining Ukraine as if Ukraine isn't a nation. They don't have an idea about this, a sense of self, which is what happened with slavery. And the issue of power comes here again, because what did they do? What happened in slavery was to first to define a particular person. Went to Africa, and define these people as livestock. Come up with a strategy to define them, stripping away their individuality. So that's what has happened here. You strip away their individuality, their humanness. And after you strip away the slave or that person's individuality, now you can use them, you can penetrate them, you can abuse them, you can dominate them in a sense. And that is the problem for society. This penchant to strip away an individual's individuality and then to penetrate and to dominate and to control. And we do that by creating labalism, creating races and divisions and so on and so forth. That is a problem for society. That is the exact motivation for this war. And you hear it in this article, the recurring theme. The denazifying state, Russia, cannot proceed from a liberal approach to denazification. The ideology of the denazifier cannot be challenged by the guilty party. Russia's recognition of the need. And when I talk about Occidentalism, Egypt, there is an article by a British there. If you check the archives or the history book, there is a presentation by a parliamentarian. I believe his name is Balfour. And in his speech to Parliament, when Egypt was occupied, was a colony of Britain, this parliamentarian who was responsible for the management and the overseeing of Egypt, he was a British parliamentarian, was in Parliament justifying why Britain should continue to remain as Egypt's masters. Why Egypt? In fact, the speech suggests that Britain knows, or England knows, what's best for the Egyptians. The Egyptians do not know what's best for them. In fact, if there's anything positive that has happened in Egypt, was because they were occupied. They were occupied. Anything good that has come out, and the conversation and the speech, in his speech, is as if anything positive that the Egyptians can celebrate is only positive because of external forces, because the Egyptians they are ordinary people. They lack a particular kind of European intelligence that is the standard, and a way of thinking and operating. And that is what has happened, this kind of ethnocentrism, privileging the English way of life over the Egyptian way of life, and then imposing that. And in a sense, Putin is also saying that he believes that the West is privileging their way of life and using Ukraine to penetrate. But Ukraine, this is a schizophrenic situation for Ukrainians, because it is as if they're in the middle. Because it's as if they do not have any say. Weaker countries or people who are at the other end of the stick do not have any power. They are sandwiched between capitalism and socialism, West and East. And this is part of the problem and the challenge for society. And I said to you that we are holding on to a thread. The article continues because it's a very long article. It goes on to say that the time frame for denazification can in no way be less than one generation who must be born, grow, and mature under the condition of denazification. The denazification of Ukraine has lasted for over 30 years, starting at least in 1989, when Ukrainian nationalism gained legal and legitimate forms of political expression and led the movement for independence towards Nazism. So you see, Russia is trying to define the individual. The Ukrainians don't have a say in who they are. Ukraine is a sovereign nation, but they are defined, and that is, I tell you, that is what power does. And those who privilege a particular position and try to, power uses various means. It will use passive means through systems and laws, and if that doesn't work, coercion. And the coercion is used after they have stripped away the individuality, the sovereignty, the person, the humanness. Then after you have done that, you move to carry out some act of war or violence. That is what has happened, and they are trying to define, in fact, they are even trying to redefine Ukraine's independence, to say that their independence is not an independence for a true independence, but it's an independence so that they can practice Nazism. Diluting a people's experience. In this article, you can see what's happening, and they are not even aware of this. The article, it suggests this dynamic, this power dynamic, as if mother is chastising a child. Okay? As if mother is chastising a child. That's what it is. The Ukraine is a child, and the mother knows what's best, and is applying and is chastising it. This is the issue. This is an issue of power. They are trying to, and here it is that Putin and the article is saying that their independence is not true independence. Their independence is one towards Nazism. But what are the Ukrainians saying? Who is saying that? Only the aggressor. When you look at dynamics, human dynamics in the world, when you study power in the world and look at victimizations, that is always the abuser. The abuser always try to justify his abuse of the other by redefining the other person, redefining the victim as being threatening, redefining the victim as being threatening. Now the article continues by saying the peculiarity of modern Nazified Ukraine is its amorphous and ambivalent nature, which allows Nazism to be disguised as aspirations for independence and the European, Western, pro-American path of development. In reality, degradation. In other words, again, let me read that. The peculiarity of modern Nazified Ukraine is its amorphous and ambivalent nature, which allows Nazism to be disguised as aspirations for independence and the European, Western, pro-American path of development. In reality, degradation. If Ukraine, who is a sovereign country, choose an independence towards a European that is Western and American, then to Russia that is degrading. That is Nazism, and that is what they're trying to root out. In reality, to degradation. To claim that the article continues, in reality, to degradation, to claim that there is no Nazism in Ukraine. So they're saying that, oh, they're just saying Ukraine have ideals of being a developed country resembling the American development. But that is just Nazism. In fact, the article didn't address it, but that's what Nazism is in this article. The article continues by saying there is no main Nazi party, no Führer, and no full-fledged racial laws, only a stripped-down version in the form of repression of the Russian language. As a consequence, there is no opposition and no resistance to the regime. However, all of the above does not make Ukrainian Nazism a light version of German Nazism of the first half of the 20th century. On the contrary, as Ukrainian Nazism is free from such genre political technology, in essence, frames and restrictions, it unfolds freely as the fundamental basis of all Nazism, like European, and in its most developed form, American racism. You see, that is exactly their talk. So you're saying the Nazism that they're trying to drain Ukraine of is not one that was Hitleric or Hitlerian, but it is one that is American racism. Therefore, Nazification cannot be carried out in a compromising way on the basis of a formula such as NATO, no EU. Yes, the collective West itself is the designer, source, and sponsor of Ukrainian Nazism, while the Western Bandera cadres and their historical memory are only one of the instruments of the Nazification of Ukraine. Ukro-Nazism is no less of a threat to peace and Russia than German Nazism of Hitler's modification. The article continues. The name Ukraine cannot apparently be retained as the title of any fully denazified state formation on any territory freed from the Nazi regime. The People's Republics, newly established in Nazi-liberated territory, must and will grow out of the practice of economic self-government and social welfare. The reconstruction and the modernization of the population's life support system. I'm going to read it again. The article continues, goes on to say, the name Ukraine cannot apparently be retained. They want to strip Ukraine of the name Ukraine. The name Ukraine cannot apparently be retained as the title. It is the same thing with slavery. They want to strip them of the language and strip them of any identity. I just said to you, power does that. The strategy of power, it strips away the individuality and your identity. The name Ukraine cannot apparently be retained, according to the article, as the title of any fully denazified state formation on territory freed from Nazi regime. The People's Republics, newly established in Nazi-liberated territory, must and will grow out of the practice of economic self-government and social welfare. The reconstruction and modernization of the population's life support systems. Their political aspirations, Ukrainians' political aspirations, in fact, cannot be neutral. Redemption of guilt towards Russia for treating it as an enemy can only be realized in reliance on Russia in the processes of reconstruction, regeneration, and development. No Marshall Plan for these territories should be allowed. There can be no neutrality in the ideological and practical sense compatible with denazification. The cadres and organizations that are the instruments of denazification in the new Nazified republics cannot but rely on the direct power and organizational support of Russia. Denazification will inevitably be de-Ukrainianization, a rejection of the large-scale artificial inflation of the ethnic component of the self-identification of the population of the territories of historical Malorussia and Novorossiya, which the Soviet authorities started. As a tool of communist superpower, artificial ethnocentrism did not remain orphaned after the fall of communism. In this service capacity, it was taken over by another superpower, power over states, the superpower of the West. It needs to be returned to its natural boundaries and stripped of its political functionality. So there's an issue of boundaries. They are nervous of this American, this Western hold that is close to their borders. They are suspicious of that. And not only that, they are suspicious, of course, not only that, they believe that their power is waning. Mother Russia's hold on the region is waning as all of these other European countries or former USSR countries adopt more Western policies, Western style of development and Western life. But can I tell you, this is not just an issue for the Poland and Ukraine and the other countries in the region, Lithuania and so on. There are all other countries. Even in Russia, the younger people are also adopting that style, this Western value, lifestyle and appetite. And I think that is what's happening. So conservative Russians are, in a sense, responding or reacting to this, because that's what happened. They feel as if their power and their control and the extent of their power is waning as well. So that's another reason for power. It's a reaction and justification for the war. It's a reaction. Whenever the power bloc or those in power feel as though their control is waning, then there is always reactive means. And of course, they use systematic means to countervail any kind of new ideological developments that seem to be mitigating against the status quo. The article continues by saying, unlike, say, Georgia and the Baltic countries, Ukraine, as history has shown, is impossible as a nation state, and attempts to build such a state inevitably lead to Nazism. Ukrainianism is an artificial anti-Russian construction with no civilizational content of its own, a subordinated element of a foreign and alien civilization. De-banderization in itself will not be enough for denazification. The Banderite element is only a performer on the screen, a disguise for the European project of Nazi Ukraine. So the denazification of Ukraine is also is inevitable. Europeanization. The Banderovian top brass must be eliminated. It is impossible to re-educate them. The social swamp that actively and passively supported it through action and inaction must survive the hardships of the war and assimilate the experience as a historical lesson and atonement for its guilt. Those who did not support the Nazi regime, who suffered from it and the war it unleashed in Donbass, must be consolidated and organized, must become the support of the new government. It's vertical and horizontal. Horizontal experience shows that wartime tragedies and dramas benefit peoples who have been seduced and carried away by the role of Russia's enemy. Denazification, as the goal of the special military operation itself, is understood as a military victory over the Kiev regime, the liberation of territories from armed supporters of Nazification, the elimination of intransigent Nazis, the capture of war criminals and the creation of the systematic conditions for subsequent peacetime denazification. The latter, in turn, should begin with the organization of local self-government, police, and defense bodies cleansed of Nazi elements, launching on their basis the founding processes of the new Republican statehood, integrating the statehood in close cooperation with the Russian Denazification Agency, the newly created or remade, say, from Russia Trinovskovo, with the adoption under Russian control of a Republican regulatory framework legislation for denazification, defining boundaries and frameworks directly in this respect. Russia should act as a custodian of the Nuremberg's process. Whatever, Russia is still trying to insert themselves. They want to de-European, denazify, de-Westernize Ukraine and set up their own government and create their own rules and own laws so as to maintain Mother Russia, so as to maintain their whole. So, Russia, I don't understand. Russia was hoping in 1989, Russia was hoping to disengage from their colonial activities, but still have a sway over these countries. It is as if these countries, you can run your own country and do what you need to do. You can elect your own government. But remember that Russia is your head of state. And I argued that recently that Jamaica is celebrating 30 years of independence. And if you read my book, I said many of the independence that some of these countries have, they're not really independent. The fact that they are so dependent and they're locked into this globalized world, into agreements that continue to keep them back, and at the same time they still have the Queen as their head of state. And if people if the Queen has to still apply her seal, and if people if people on the mainland want to appeal a particular decision of the court, they have to go to Britain. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, let's continue with the article. The article continues by saying all of the above means that in order to achieve the goals of denazification, the support of the population, their transition to Russia, after being freed from the terror, violence, and ideological pressure of the Kiev regime, after being removed from the informational isolation, is necessary. Of course, it will take some time for people to recover from the shock of military action and to become convinced of Russia's long-term intentions, that they will not be abandoned. It is impossible. I mean, they are justifying why they want to take over another country and to impose that country's will. The article continues. You see, they feel as though they are justified. The article continues. It is impossible to foresee in advance in which territories this mass of population will constitute a critically needed majority. The Catholic province, Western Ukraine, comprising 5 regions, is unlikely to be part of the pro-Russian territories. The line of exclusion, however, will be found by experience. A hostile to Russia, but forcibly neutral and demilitarized Ukraine with formally banned Nazism will remain behind it. Russian or Russia haters will go there. A guarantee that this residual Ukraine will remain neutral should be the threat of an immediate continuation of the military cooperation if the listed requirements are not met. This would probably require a permanent Russian military presence on its territory. From the alienation line and up to the Russian border would be the territory of potential integration into Russian civilization. Anti-fascist in its inner nature. Ukraine's denazification operation, and that's the special operation. The operation is, and that is why I'm telling you, right now there's peace talk between Ukraine and Russia, but there's no peace talk. It's a facade. They're just buying time. Because if Russia still have these ideas about Ukraine and ideas about Mother Russia and Russian values and ideologies and maintain their suspicions of the West and have ideas that involves dominating and controlling all of that particular Russia and the region surrounding, then there is no peace, because the Ukrainians are not giving up their independence, and they will continue to resist because they recognize themselves as individuals, as people with soul and with value, as human beings who have an idea about how they want to live their lives and the type of country that they want. And it is not one that involves Russian value. And that's a problem for Russia, because it affects their ability to control. The article continues by saying, liquidation of armed Nazi formation. I'm gonna repeat it again. Ukraine denazification operation, which began with a military phase, will follow in peacetime the same logic of stages as a military operation. At each of them, irreversible changes will have to be achieved, which will be the results of the corresponding stage. The necessary initial steps of denazification can be defined as follows. 1. Liquidation of the armed Nazi formations, understood to mean any armed formations of Ukraine, including the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as the military, informational, and educational infrastructure supporting their activity. The formation of people's self-government and police, defense, and law and order in the liberated territories, protecting the population from the terror of underground Nazi groups, installation of the Russian information space, removal of educational materials and the prohibition of educational programs at all levels that contain Nazi ideological attitudes, massive investigations into personal responsibility for war crimes, crimes against humanity, dissemination of Nazi ideology and support for the Nazi regime. This is exactly what they did. You know what? This is how control of power works. You know, when slaves, during the slave trade, they separated the slaves into various groups and to tribes so that they wouldn't be able to understand each other and communicate with each other. All this strategy, all these systems that they're coming up with to maintain their hold, once they're able to install their government, and that's what they're trying to do. There is no peace. The only peace is when they have installed the government, and they are saying that there is no peace if there's no negotiation. There's no negotiating this peace. There's no negotiating. They're not giving up Crimea, Donbass, Mariupol, and these other countries, and leaving the rest of Ukraine to still be infested with Nazi value, which they call Western value, which can still penetrate the other areas that they have now taken control of. So Russia's operations, military operation in Ukraine, doesn't stop with taking over 3 or 4 cities and towns and regions. It involves taking control of all of Ukraine. All of Ukraine. So, the article continues by saying, part of the process, the formation of people's self-government and police and so on and so forth, part of and liberating the territories and protecting the population from the terror of underground Nazi group, part of the process not only involves removal of education materials and the listing disclosures of the names of collaborators and the adoption of the local level under Russian curatorship of primary denazification, but also establishing memorials, commemorative signs, monuments to the victims of Ukrainian Nazism, commemorating the heroes of the struggle against it, the inclusion of a set of anti-fascist and denazification norms in the constitutions of the new people's republics, creation of permanent denazification bodies for a period of 25 years, Russia will have no allies in the Nazification of Ukraine, as this is a purely Russian affair, and also a purely Russian affair, and also because not just the Bandera version of Nazi Ukraine will be eradicated. In other words, Ukraine idea of who they want and what they want. And that's what happened. Some of these countries that negotiate their independence, they negotiated their independence, and an independence that was acceptable by those who were empowered, where they can continue to keep their hold. But if people want an independence where they accept different set of values and a different set of vision that runs incongruous to those who are now abdicating their power, then it becomes a problem. And then what happens is that they reconsider and retake. So Russia will have, so the article says Russia will have no allies in the Nazification of Ukraine, as this is a purely Russian affair, and also because not just the Bandera version of Nazi Ukraine will be eradicated, but also, and above all, Western totalitarianism, imposed programs of civilizational degradation and disintegration, mechanisms of subordination to the superpower of the West and the USA. The article continues, in order to implement the plan of denazification of Ukraine, Russia itself will have to finally give up its pro-European and pro-Western illusions to realize itself as the last instance of protection and preservation of those values of historical Europe, the old world. The old world I talk about is the old holding on. They're holding on, which deserve it, and which the West ultimately abandoned, having lost in the struggle for itself. This struggle continued throughout the 20th century and manifested itself in the World War and the Russian Revolution, inextricably linked to each other. Russia did everything it could to save the West in the 20th century. It realized that the main Western project, the alternative to capitalism, which defeated the nation states, the socialist Red Project. It crushed German Nazism, the monstrous spawn of the crisis of Western civilization. The last act of Russian altruism was Russia's outstretched hand of friendship, for which Russia received a monstrous blow in the 1990s. You see that's what power does. Or those in power, they start to talk about what good they have done to help the other. They started to list their efforts, which aren't efforts, which are at best fantastic, talking about how Russia has helped to preserve West and their values from Nazi penetration. But if you study history, that is not true because history will tell you where Russia has been on the side of World War I and World War II. But let's continue. Every Russia, according to the article, everything Russia has done for the West, it has done it has done at its own expense by making the greatest sacrifices. The West eventually rejected all these sacrifices, devalued Russia's contribution to resolving the Western crisis, and decided to take revenge on Russia for the help it unselfishly provided. So Russia thinks that its effort to denazify, this particular article is so conflicting and so ambivalent. It is suspicious of the West and saying that it is trying to drain Ukraine of Western ideological values, that is penetrating its value, that is penetrating its own borders. And at the same time, it is saying that, they're saying Russia has helped to defend and to preserve the West from Nazism and from certain values and principles that runs against it. And it is also saying that this particular war is also Russia is a war. It's Russia trying to help the West. It's part of the sacrifice it is making to help the West. Everything that Russia has done for the West, it has done at its own expense by making the greatest sacrifices. That's what it says. The West eventually rejected all these sacrifices, devalued Russia's contribution to resolving the Western crisis, and decided to take revenge on Russia for the help it unselfishly provided. Help it. This is a psychological problem. We hear, narcissist. This is how narcissists think. You already, and that's an issue of power as well. Eventually, they believe that the privilege that they have in society, it comes from above, it comes from God. They are supposed to be where they are. They believe that they are supposed to be in power. And that's what happens, when people create certain stratosphere and levels in society, and so on and so forth. Welcome back. Before the interruption, we were wrapping up this article entitled Russian State News Agency published a piece calling for full-blown genocide and destruction of Ukraine as a state. And we were at the end of the publication, which says everything Russia has done for the West, it has done at its own expense by making the greatest sacrifices. The West eventually rejected all these sacrifices, devalued Russia's contribution to resolving the Western crisis, and decided to take revenge on Russia for the help it unselfishly provided. And I'm saying this makes no sense. That Russia cannot say, well, this is an ambivalent argument, we were saying. It collapses on its head and it is quite laughable. Because this, in fact, the argument is convoluted. How can you, in one breath, say that you are denazifying Ukraine from Western values, from Americanism, and at the same time, and also you are saying that Ukraine is being used as a puppet by the West to penetrate Russia and to control Russia? And so your special operation is draining Ukraine from this. And at the same time, the article ends by saying that everything that Russia has done, it has done at its own expense by making the greatest sacrifices. How is that? That argument is ambivalent. You cannot, in one breath, say that you are helping the West by draining Ukraine, by talking of draining Ukraine of Western values. Why would, and I said earlier before the interruption, if America already thinks that if you say America thinks that its values are of a higher caste or it is exceptional, and why would America come and bear Russia's help in draining Ukraine of American values, a value? If another country is adopting their way of life and their lifestyle, why would America want Russia to make sacrifices to prevent that from happening? That makes no sense. And I say to you, the only reason he can make this argument is because he's talking to Russians. He's not talking to people, to West and to other. He's talking to the Russians. And I said to you, communication is to make popular what was a monopoly. And he has control of information. And he's selling a lie, but first of all, this very same article suggests something else, that he's trying to, America, that they're suspicious of American values, and that Americanism is a new kind of denazification, is a new kind of Nazism in the world that is trying to take hold, and they're trying to prevent that. And at the same time, at the end, they're saying that they are helping the US or America or the West to deal with Ukraine. And then the article goes on to say, from here on, Russia will go on its own way without worrying about the fate of the West in the building on another part of its legacy, leadership in the global decolonization process. So this is laughable. Putin and Russia here it says that it is helping the West. It is helping the West, or it was helping the West, or helping the US to decolonize. When what it is doing in Ukraine, it is a kind of colonization, but of a different color and make, that I talk about neoliberalism or the neoliberal. The neoliberalism or the neoliberal is just a name that suggests strategy. It's a strategy. It is duplicitous and hypocritical. You say that you are helping to the West to drain the world of colonialism or colonization, but at the same time, you are still utilizing the same, and even outline in this very same article what you intend to do with Ukraine through processes of colonization. So in a sense, you are trying to transport or replace one kind of control with another. Does that make sense? Does that make it right? So that's what I'm saying. The argument is laughable. Further, further it says from here on, Russia will go on its own way without worrying about the fate of the West. Excuse me. I said earlier before the interruption, and Russia has already been going on its own. When it went into Crimea, against the urgings of the US and other countries, and against sanctions, and it has created several aggressions and intimidations in the world. It even invaded Georgia. It went on its own. And when it invaded Ukraine, Russia and Putin decided that on their own. That wasn't a collaborative effort. So it is laughable and it is narcissistic. That's a narcissistic kind, and that's what people who are in power develop, that level of narcissism, to believe as though they have arrived. Their power is justified. Their privilege is justified. In a monarchical system, or in a world where we were ruled by nobles and kings and queens and emperors and the Pope, they believed that their authority and their power came from God. They appealed to something from above so as to trick people into being complicit in accepting their lives being dominated by somebody else who has hijacked power for themselves, appealing to an ideology that was universalized for that very same purpose, to increase, to establish, or to maintain power. They appeal to some higher power. You see all this instance of, you see how power works through certain principles and ideologies, which is, when you study historical literature, and it's not just Western society, but even Eastern societies, because here
we are going to stop here. That is the episode. It was for 1 hour and 28 minutes, and I think it. But I'm going to stop here. You can go back and listen to some of our episodes. We have over 150 episodes, and just some update as to what's going on with the Russian Ukraine debacle or Russian invasion of Ukraine. We know now that, and we had published some other episodes after that talking about how the world is slow. Germany and the world, the United Nations, were very slow in terms of responding and to providing any help. And because there was and we talked about the connectionisms, the connections that exist between countries, the elites, and so they're slow. So they had to first dismantle the connections, because once, if they apply too much embargo, it may affect them, because all of these countries and their elites are connected. So it took them a while to, and now they're responding in a sense. Now they've been very slow. But the U.S. They were just recently, the vice president in Germany uh, called Russia, made a public statement calling Russia, um, I made an allegation saying that calling Russia as, Russia as being, as committing crimes. Sorry, Russia as committing crimes against humanity, which means then now that they can't be helped, they can't be supported. But of course, China is supporting Russia, and I believe that they are now making, now it's public. It's now public. So China is supporting Russia, and so I don't know what's gonna happen. The stage is set. This is the Neil Baron podcast. We will continue providing some powerful. And just an update regarding President Putin's speech today. In his speech, he talks of his relationship with China, because he reported and revealed that China will visit, or there will be a meeting between Russia and China. The Russian leader and the Chinese leader and the Russian leader will visit. Will meet in the spring. China will visit Russia. They are publicly demonstrating their relationship and their renewed and strengthened position in the world. And that's news coming in, and that's important, and that's a takeaway from the war. Of course, President Putin will not back down. He will not back down. I am telling you that. Russia will not back down. And other people are talking about, I saw where I'm telling you, other people in the news are talking about what's going on with President Biden, but this podcast today looked at his philosophical basis for the war. And when you study his speech, those two speeches, and the speech today, it suggests a man that's on a mission. He is not going to back down. Hitler did not back down until V-Day, before D-Day, and he committed suicide. That is the kind of man Putin is. When you think of this war, think of World War One and World War Two, and think of Hitler. That's the kind of attitude and the mentality that Putin has. So if people think that these strategies and diplomacies are going to work, and we have already said that it's not going to work, because when you study Putin and the speech, it reveals his mind, and this news and this article that we played earlier today, it suggests his intention that he is resolute and he's unmoving. And of course, this news coming out of China and coming out from the Kremlin, that there is some renewed relationship. I wonder what they're going to talk about this spring. Oh, there's one more thing before we go that I must add. There is an opportunity that I was asked to pass along. Please pass this information along if you know someone who is a qualified contractor, plumbers and electricians for home repair program, black owned and minority business owners, PA registered and licensed business holders are encouraged to apply. And to the and let me see, it's at qualified contractors. We need you, the PHDC. You can. I got this information from the president for the CARICOM community in Philadelphia. I'm trying to find the contact information, which I cannot find, and I'm quite sure I had put that information here. Can't find it, but I'll talk more about this as the week go on. You can go to PHDC. You can go to my Twitter page because there's somewhere on my Twitter. I tweet sometime today. And there's a link to it, or you can go to the PHDC. Philadelphia Opportunity Zone. That's what Philadelphia Opportunity Zone. Let me see. The Philadelphia Opportunity Zone. I think. I think that's what the Philadelphia Opportunity. I was trying to find. There is more information on here. Um, PhiladelphiaOpportunityZone.org. There we go. So yeah, okay, there we go. It says, please pass this information along if you know someone who is qualified, contractor, plumbers, and electricians for home repair program. Black-owned and minority business owners, PA registered and licensed business owners, are encouraged to apply by the due date March 13th, 2023. Visit Phila Opportunity Zones.org. Again, PHILA opportunity or PPORTUNITY zones ZONES.org. And that's that. That's an opportunity, and as we get the opportunity, I think there's more coming in, but we are out of time for this episode today. Thank you for listening to another powerful episode of the Neoliberal Round podcast. Please, you can participate in this podcast by going on the Spotify platform and answering the question. And again, let's see what's the question. Well, with all the dynamic surrounding the Russian invasion and China's support and spy balloon and the Western support, is a World War III imminent? Yes or no? And again, you can participate on the Spotify platform or via our Twitter, LinkedIn, or Reddit feeds. The handle Ronaldo McKenzie or Reverend Ronaldo C. McKenzie for LinkedIn. And again, I said later this week we will have John Anthony Castro providing an update on his suit, which is being expedited to the U.S. Supreme Court. And again, why ABC and other new mainstream news media people are snubbing him as if he's not running for president and he's not Republican challenging Trump. They've been reporting that Nikki Haley is the first. Even Vice President Pence was caught saying that. But we'll hear that on Friday. Author Teal Jackson, her new book, Purpose Through the Pain. I will have her on the show sometime in a couple of days. I've been promising that for a while, but we will have her on the show probably by tomorrow or maybe Saturday. And I will also be sharing, I have a podcast ready for you on weed, marijuana, but on weed. Black people should not be rich, the other people should be. Subscribe for free at https://anchor and it's https://anchor.fm/the neoliberal. And of course, you can donate to us. We invite all donations at anchor.fm/the neoliberal/support. And visit us at theneoliberal.com. The Neoliberal Corporation is serving the world today to solve tomorrow's challenges by making popular what was the monopoly. By the way, I forgot, I need to add this. This podcast is available at Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, The Audible, the Alexa, Google Podcast, P-Adverb, iHeartRadio, Radio Public, Podvine, Pocket Casts, Stitcher, and theneoliberal.com, and RonaldoCMcKenzie.com, which is offline temporarily but will be up shortly. What good?